sitting alongside diet, exercise. I'm wondering where you think sleep sits as a contributor to lifespan.
To me, it's the foundation.
Oh.
Dr. Cheri Mah is a board-certified sleep physician who works with elite athletes and leaders operating in some of the most demanding environments. And today she'll share the science behind her approach,
Shooting accuracy improved. Your free throw shots increased by 9%.
as well as answering some of the biggest questions. How do we know how much sleep we personally need? Can some people thrive on less than 7 hours? Does it matter if we wake in the night to go to the bathroom? And do we actually need less sleep as we age, or is getting quality sleep simply harder? In a world obsessed with productivity, we'll hear how sleep is the most overlooked performance enhancer of all and how to get more of it.
Dr. Mah, thank you so much for joining me. Sleep has been swept into the corner of health conversations for too long, but fortunately, that is changing now. I'd love to start by just finding out why you decided to focus on sleep.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here today and really excited to talk about sleep. It's something that we all experience and go through this fascinating process every night, sometimes better on some nights, and other times it's a little bit rockier. And so, I got interested in sleep as an undergrad and really met the father figure of the field. His name was Dr. William Dement. He started the whole field of modern sleep medicine, discovering rapid eye movement sleep in his graduate work. And the whole field really evolved out of his early research studies, and then the first sleep clinic at Stanford, and then the progression to what the field is today. And it just was a fascinating process to me that we still don't know why exactly we sleep. I got interested particularly with the interventions on how do you enhance this recovery process? How do we pay back what's called accumulated sleep debt? And my research focus became looking at performance in elite athletes because they're a great model system where performance is monitored. It is important when it comes to tenths and hundredths of a second. And there's that motivation to perform at the top of your game every day. And so this was a great group to study, and I really started to understand that if we focus on not just duration, but the quality of sleep, we were starting to be able to quantify how much of a difference that could make for reaction time or how much that would reduce fatigue levels. And ultimately, for athletes, we were able to quantify how that would improve accuracy or on-field, on-court performance measures. And so that led me down this interesting path of applying that science and then working with professional athletes and now sports teams across the NFL, NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, Olympic athletes, and other types of high performers like executives and CEOs to really look at how can we leverage sleep and circadian science to help us be our best each and every day.
Because it's so interesting because when you think about it, I mean, even recently, I've heard, particularly in the kind of field of business, corporate performance, you're almost encouraged to get as little sleep as possible and be up at 4 a.m. and in the gym at 4 a.m. and then into work. And I mean, people must be absolutely exhausted. Do you get any pushback around that, around this sort of belief that you're almost a stronger leader? I mean, we see this with politicians a lot. You're a stronger leader if you sleep less.
I hear that badge of honor, and that has been persistent, I think, in our society for a long time. But I do believe that that is changing. And I do see that there are more executives and CEOs like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. They talk about the power of sleep and how that has changed over their career, even of how they prioritize it and have made adjustments to now get 7 or 8 hours of sleep every day because they know they're not actually their best when they're exhausted. They know they're not going to be making good decisions. They're not going to be leading their teams to the best of their abilities when they're trying to make these high stakes decisions when they're so worn down and exhausted, right? And so I would say tides are turning, and I hope that there are more leaders in industry. I think there are some athletes now that are much more vocal than in the past about how essential they need that 8 to 10 hours to get that fuel in the tank so that they're ready to go and ready to perform, train, and ultimately compete. Now, of course, there still is that badge of honor that persists, and there are some folks that say, I'm gonna sleep when I'm dead, or, I'm gonna get just that 4 to 5 hours and grind. And I
Yes.
actually think that that's really terrible, right? It's like that's really sad if you're not able to get that rejuvenating sleep that we know is so essential for your brain, for your body's physiology, for your physical capabilities to be able to be replenished and restored. And I hope that that is going to continue to change over the next couple of years as people embrace and understand how vital this area is.
Yeah, I think that the message is definitely starting to get out there. Probably not totally ingrained in public consciousness yet. I mean, am I right in thinking that, when we sleep, we talk about recovery and so on, but that includes like muscle recovery. So for athletes, that would be crucial in the healing of their muscles. Is that right?
Definitely. So we have different stages of sleep. You have light sleep, and then you have deep sleep. And during deep sleep, that's when you get this biggest pulse of growth hormone. That's essential for muscle recovery, regeneration, restoration. And that's typically that really rejuvenating sleep that people
Mm.
really crave. And then you have this dreaming sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. And that's about 25% every night. And this goes in this cycle around 90 to 120 minutes through the evening. Depending on how long you give yourself for duration, you get through typically 5 or 6 of these cycles.
And I mean, in terms of our brain health, what's happening in our brains as we sleep?
Yes, there's been this discovery of what's called the glymphatic system. And I find this so intriguing because think of it as your waste removal system in your brain. And the byproducts that build up through the day need to be removed. And this is this system that really helps remove these waste products at night, but it's actually more active specifically when we're sleeping. And so there is implications that some of these byproducts, as they build up, have potential implications for, say, increased risk for like Alzheimer's disease. And there's obviously an association of poor sleep with some of these
Hmm.
neurodegenerative diseases. And so the thought is that perhaps this system may not be functioning as well or may be altered when we have these neurodegenerative risk factors. And so the more that we understand about this lymphatic system, perhaps we'll understand how we can address and minimize some of these risks for individuals.
I'm interested to know how we as individuals can tell how much sleep we ideally need because we're told, okay, some people only need 7. Ideally, you get between 7 and 8 is what we generally hear. You can maybe put us right on this, but you talked about athletes needing up to 10 hours sleep at night. How would we know? Can we know?
So it's a great question. There is the duration. There's also the quality of our sleep, and then there's the timing of our sleep. So if we go
Mm.
to that first bucket, duration, the national recommendation by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine is 7 hours minimally for every adult. And that's to
Right.
prevent health risks, to prevent performance decrements, to be able to keep you functioning well each and every day. But that's the lower threshold, and you might actually need 8 hours. You might need
Mm.
8 hours. Some of my elite athletes, they do need 9 or 10 hours in there because of that physiologic demand that they endure every day. Now, you have to find what works for you. I know that I don't do well on 7 hours. I feel much better on
Mm.
the 8.5 or 9 hours. So there's that individual variability. But I think if you're able to experiment with actually increasing your sleep by, let's say, 15 or 30 minutes, every day this week, you probably will start to notice a difference if that actually is working in your favor and you feel more refreshed, you're able to function better in the day, versus if that additional 15 or 30 minutes you start to have more difficulty, say, falling asleep or not being able to sleep through the night as much because perhaps your what we call your drive to sleep isn't as high with that additional window of opportunity to sleep.
Well, I must say, I started going to bed earlier, probably around a year ago. And by early, I mean, I get into bed at 10, I read till 10:30, lights go out then. And then I pretty much wake myself up before my alarm. My alarm is set for 7:15, but I normally wake up around 6:45 quite regularly. Every night, ever since childhood, I have to get up to the toilet, usually just once. And it's always slightly worried me because you talk about these cycles. I'm quite reassured by that because I kept thinking, am I, by having to get up at 2 a.m. every night, disrupting some major cycle that happens around that time into sleep? But how damaging, or is that damaging? Because a lot of us have to get up to go to the toilet in the night.
I will reassure you that it's okay. It's fine to wake up throughout the nighttime
Yeah.
within reason. Know that we do often have these awakenings as we are coming out of a sleep cycle or transitioning between the sleep stages. You may or may not recall consciously that you have these awakenings, but if we were to look at your sleep objectively, we would see that there's more
Okay.
awakenings during the night than you actually even can perceive. So, one, know that awakenings are very normal. And two, going up to use the restroom once during the night and then coming back to bed, if you're able to fall back asleep within 5-10 minutes, then I actually have no worries about that. If you're waking up and using the restroom 3, 4, 5 times in the middle of the night, then you're really fragmenting your sleep, and then maybe it's time to evaluate some of your hydration and fluid intake so that we can minimize it, and or obviously there could be other reasons for it medically. But if it's one time, maybe 2 times, no issues falling back asleep within several minutes, then you're great.
I mean, can people oversleep? Because some people, I mean, people not too far away from me of the younger generation in this very house seem to need a lot of sleep.
Yeah,
Uh,
so you're
Teenagers.
yes, teenagers are a special, age group for sure. At the teenage years, you really do need 8 to 10 hours every single
Mm.
night. Far few teens actually get to that amount of sleep, but that is what's recommended by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine for the teenage adolescent range. Yeah, teenagers need 8 to 10 hours, and adults need that minimum 7 hours, probably
Mm.
closer 8 or 9. Sometimes individuals will get more sleep, and that can actually be beneficial. And what we call that
Okay.
is sleep extension. And that's where a lot of my research has really focused on how do we pay back what we call accumulated sleep debt by getting additional hours of sleep beyond what our bodies require so we can start to pay that debt down. Now, that is actually recommended to do that gradually over time. If, for example, we know we've had sleep loss in the last day, the last week, the last couple of weeks. And so that's a way that you actually do want to get more sleep than your body typically requires. Now, your question about oversleeping is sometimes people will say, okay, I'm going to try to catch up on sleep on the weekend. And they give themselves, say 10 hours when they typically have been sleeping, say 6 hours during the work week. And then they will wake up and say, oh, I feel sluggish. I'm tired. I
Yes.
feel like I overslept. I don't want to do that again. What the reality is that one, they've had a large swing in their sleep schedule. So to go from 6 hours to now 10, they probably woke up 2 to 3 hours much later into the morning time. So their body clock may have started to
Mm.
shift. They also probably have that sleep debt that's been built up through that week and really kind of full force of hitting them when they don't have a lot of the stimulating activities in the week, like work or school, that can mask over that sleep deprivation temporarily. And so they're feeling kind of that weight of sleep debt. And then there's other factors. They may be further dehydrated, having slept many more hours than typical. And as I
Mm.
mentioned, that later wake up time very much can shift your schedule. Lastly, they only do that maybe for one night or 2 nights on the weekend. And so it's not a long enough period for their bodies also to reacclimate. And so the bottom line is largely, I don't think that there is this oversleeping. It's just that there's these underlying factors that have culminated to give this perception that it's not what would be ideal and how they would feel when they really are refreshed.
You talk about sleep debt. I'm interested in that because I know you think that, well, there is a need to sort of catch up on what we've missed. If we've had a couple of rough nights along the way or a rough night, we should try and catch up on that. I mean, do you think that napping is the best approach? Do you think getting an earlier night the next night trying to tackle it that way. Is there a more strategic approach to catching up on missed sleep?
Yes, to catch up on sleep debt, I would recommend focusing on your sleep at night. That would be ideal to have 15, 30 minutes more consistently, say every day this week. If you did that, you'd have almost 2 hours more of sleep this week. Naps, I do like, but I don't necessarily treat them as paying back sleep debt. Oftentimes, they're shorter. I recommend 20 to 30 minutes. That won't put a big dent into your sleep debt. And so really think about that as a boost for alertness and performance for a few hours to help you get through that afternoon or the evening time. Really focus on getting that consolidated sleep at night, because also the stages of sleep that you may get in that night period is different than what you would get during a nap.
Yeah, which if I nap, it tends to be sort of 10, 15 minutes, and it might perk me up a bit, but you can't really imagine there's been much kind of quality recovery within that period.
You do get benefits. So even a short 10-minute nap has been shown to provide benefits for alertness and performance. So you still are doing it at the right timing, but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the main strategy to pay back sleep debt.
Do you find, well, actually, I'd be interested to know if you personally have ever experienced this when you're so focused on sleep, and the more and more you understand about how important sleep is. Now, if I were you, the way my mind works, I'd be like, what if I couldn't sleep? And I would probably work myself into the state where I wasn't sleeping. Have you ever been through a period like that where you're like, I know this is really important, therefore I'm now feeling under pressure to get sleep?
Oh, I have, I've had various periods of my life where I haven't slept well, right? I can go back to high school, being very sleep deprived during that age, as we talk about adolescence. I was in medical school for many years and medical training where my schedule wasn't my own. So I was doing shift work with night shifts, so having to sleep in the daytime, and those challenges of sleeping on a non-ideal schedule.
Mm.
And now I'm a mom of two young kids. I have a baby at home, and so my sleep
Oh,
is fragmented. And so, yes, of course, the more you learn about an area, the more you realize that there's a lot to apply to your own life. And I'm a work in progress trying to apply this myself.
I guess it's reassuring for you though, and for all of us to know that there are ways we can catch up. If we go through, I mean, I'm thinking at my stage, perimenopausal, 53, there are nights where you just know hormones are to blame, whether it's like a kind of night sweats or whatever's going on. There's more fragmented nights, and other nights I sleep soundly, and it is reassuring to know that we could kind of do a catch up.
Yeah, definitely. You can and should make up that night of sleep if for some reason it was rocky and you didn't have the best night and that was curtailed so you didn't get enough hours. I think one approach to be reassuring is that even if you don't get sufficient hours, what have you done to ensure that the quality of your sleep is as best as possible, right? And that can mean factors from, is your environment ideal, like a cave, dark, quiet, cool, comfortable, consistent? Do you have a wind down routine before bed to transition from your day? How have you consumed caffeine? Have you had alcohol in the evening time? Did you get exercise in your day? Were you able to get some sunlight throughout your afternoon or your early morning? And so I think regardless of if you are in a situation where you don't get the duration, I think one way to really improve your sleep is making sure you have these goals in the quality of sleep, and also ensuring that the timing of your sleep, when you go to bed and when you wake up, are also a part of this equation, so that you're tackling each of these areas to ensure that you're getting the best rest possible.
I've got to say, you mentioned caffeine there. Um, Again, I think age-related, and I'm wondering if you see this much in people that you work with and have studied. At 53, I've had to stop drinking coffee, which I have drunk all my life. But first of all, I gave it up because it was impacting my gut. It was giving me an upset stomach. And when I swapped to, I now just have a couple of cups of tea, and I noticed a big improvement in my sleep. So those nights that I talked about, those kind of hormonal night sweats, hot nights, not really happening very much at all now. And lastly, standing to work more in the day, which was, when I've pieced it together, my sleep has so improved. I really think these factors have made quite a big difference for me. Going back to caffeine there, does that change with age? Can we become more sensitive? Is it something you see in women going through perimenopause? And what's a pattern there that you've observed?
I mean, caffeine is a stimulant that very much can influence your sleep. There are faster metabolizers and there's slower metabolizers, and I think each of us innately kind of knows if we're more sensitive to that caffeine, and so you should definitely, if that's the case, stick to the caffeine in the morning time. It sounds like you've had this change where you recognize that it is influencing your sleep more so now versus maybe when you were younger. I also will say that your sleep is changing as you get older as well, right? The stages that you get during the nighttime are not actually all the same as you get older, particularly actually for men. You lose more of that deep sleep. You often will have more of the lighter sleep, and so their awakenings can occur, which is a very normal part of that aging process. And people perceive that to mean that they need less sleep, but we don't think that that is actually true. We think the duration still is the same. Now, with caffeine, the half-life is about 6 hours, and so depending on when you have your last coffee of the day, say it even is at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, by 9 o'clock, half of that still can be metabolically active.
Yes.
There was a study that specifically looked at what is the cutoff time for coffee not to impact sleep objectively when they looked across a number of caffeine studies. And that cutoff time was actually a little bit longer at 8.8 hours, suggesting that you really should put a stop to caffeine if a typical bedtime is 10 o'clock, I think is what you shared, then more like 1 o'clock would be a
Yes.
better target for you, or obviously keeping it just to the morning time, because
Yeah.
that really can influence objectively how your sleep is, as well as the type and stages of sleep.
Yes. I mean, for me, when I was drinking coffee, I couldn't drink it past 10 a.m. And yet some people say that caffeine makes them sleepy. And you're thinking, oh.
I think those are the ones that are probably very sleep deprived. You do build a tolerance to caffeine, right? And so you can need more if you are regularly consuming, and the stimulating effects are, you can become more tolerant to it. So I would say it's probably the tolerance, as well as people who are very sleep deprived can still go quickly into sleep, even with stimulants on board, because that weight of that sleep debt and just needing to get to sleep can be very overwhelming.
Well, I'm thinking of people who are watching and listening who are really struggling with sleep. And I suspect conversations like this sometimes can be anxiety inducing when you're thinking, I am getting up multiple times a night. I get very broken, fragmented sleep. I wake very early. I go to bed very late. Is there a starting point for somebody who is in that situation? What would your strategy be if you were then?
I think that's a great question, and I want to be reassuring that we all will struggle with sleep at times, right? We'll have a bad night and you're going to be okay. We've all had a night of 5 or 6 hours and we're still able to function. The more important thing is thinking about how have you approached your sleep in the week or in this last month. A starting point, I think, is to know that making small but gradual changes is what's sustainable, and that is going to make a difference. So don't think that you need to overhaul your whole system, or how you sleep now. I think starting with small, practical steps, and that can mean if you're getting 6 hours of sleep and you're trying to get to 7, why don't you go to 6 hours and 15 minutes this week, every day? We
Yeah.
can all do 15 minutes. One of the studies that I often share is that 15 minutes makes a difference. It's the difference of an A student to a B student. And then there's a study that has looked at B students to C students, and the difference is only 11 minutes. So it's not huge jumps that you have to target. You can do that 15 minutes every day this week, and it will add up. Or in the quality area, if you have no wind down routine and you frequently are having a racing mind and not able to shut those thoughts off at night, why don't you take even 5 or 10 minutes today to journal, do a to-do list, and then have an activity that you find relaxing, like reading or listening to calming music. And if you do that every day this week, you'll start to build this system so that your brain and your body can anticipate that every single night. And so that 10 minutes I don't think is a huge investment, but the trade-off is going to be tremendous because it really can transform how you approach your sleep and get better prepared so you're setting yourself up for the best sleep possible at night. And then I'll even say, like, in the timing, we know the bedtime and wake time should be consistent every day, 7 days a week. Our bodies like that regularity. And I know easier said than done, but if you have a bedtime window right now that is spanning from 9 p.m. to midnight, can we target a more narrow window even of an hour and a half and then eventually narrow that down? You really do want to keep that wake up time the same. And so just stick with that same wake up time if you can pick one for the whole week.
Are there any people who can survive and thrive on just a few hours sleep? Because I mean, it's come up throughout history, well-known leaders who only had a few hours sleep at night. But does that all really normally always catch up with people in the end? Or are there just some individuals who are at the extreme of a spectrum who can exist and seemingly thrive without very much sleep at all?
There are individuals, but it is quite rare. So these are called genetic short sleepers. And they do seem to have genetic predispositions. So there are certain families that we're finding have these mutations in certain genes that control sleep and wake. And they do fine on cognitive tests and performance tests when they only are getting usually 4 to 6 hours of sleep. Now, the percentage of those individuals, though, is very rare,
Yeah.
probably 1 to 3% of the population. So the
Yeah.
reality is it's probably not you. And it's not that you can't survive and get through a day on 4 to 6 hours, but you arguably are not your best. If we tested your reaction time, your decision making, your ability to process information, to learn and remember, it would not be at peak. And so I will say the vast majority of us probably really do need that 7-hour minimum threshold, but sometimes it just becomes not a priority, or it's just not the way that some individuals have structured their day so that they get not just the duration, but the quality factors to be a part of how they approach their daily routine.
I mean, that 1 to 3%, would that have been a lifelong trait, likely?
Yes. These
Yeah.
run in families. So they are being studied in San Francisco in a research lab, looking at some of these specific mutations that have been identified in the last decade.
I mean, similarly, we talked about whether you can have too much sleep, but people who find themselves feeling tired, regularly napping, I mean, there are people who take daily naps. Is that necessarily unhealthy to be requiring a daily nap? Or what does the norm tend to look like around napping if you've had an otherwise perfectly fine night's sleep, but you still find yourself feeling sleepy in the afternoon?
Yeah, so I would say we'd want to understand a little bit more in that context of why you're napping. If it is just to give yourself a little bit of a boost to get through the afternoon into the evening, generally if it's short and you feel refreshed and you're able to function well in the day, generally not too big of an issue. Ideally, if you're well rested, you shouldn't really need and crave a nap throughout the day on a regular basis. A regular nap may suggest that perhaps you could benefit from getting a little bit more sleep at night. So I think that is one way to consider experimenting with that 15 or 30 minutes more. Um, and then with naps, I mean, if you're someone who is trying to compensate for insufficient sleep at nighttime and then taking really long naps of 2 to 3 hours, that's not a great trend because it's breaking up what would be your consolidated sleep at night. There are individuals who regularly nap in the afternoon because we get this dip in our circadian rhythm or our body clock. So between 1 to 4 o'clock, that's when it's easiest to take that that nap, and that's typically when individuals will snooze for a bit. But I would say, yeah, it depends on how you're functioning through the rest of the day. If you're waking up refreshed, you're alert, you're able to do the activities that you want to throughout the day, and you're really just using that nap for a little bit more of a boost, generally, I think that's okay.
I'm wondering where you think sleep sits as a contributor to health span, lifespan, um, almost like a percentage. I don't know if you've ever thought of it like that, but sitting alongside diet, exercise, maybe mental attitude, where sleep sits alongside those other factors.
To me, it's the foundation.
Oh,
I yes, I don't think of it as a pillar that is, standing alongside exercise and nutrition, and then there's sleep. I truly believe that it's foundational, and everything
okay.
is stacking on top of that, because without healthy sleep, you really are not your best, you're not your healthiest. When you have that every single day as your base, you're able to thrive in your exercise. You make better decisions in nutrition and can eat healthier. You're able to tackle mental health. You're able to be in a better mood, etc. So to me, it is the foundation of our health.
And I'm guessing, therefore, as well. I mean, I think I've heard little snippets of research around this along the way. That foundation, if it's not there, does it therefore affect our gut bacteria? We talked about our ability to build and repair muscle. So this is almost more than performance. It's kind of affecting, us at a sort of cellular level there.
Our body's physiology needs adequate and sufficient sleep at nighttime. When we're short on sleep, it affects our immune function. We're more
Mm.
susceptible to the common cold. Our hormone levels are not properly balanced when we're not getting sufficient sleep. So for example, the appetite hormones of leptin and ghrelin that control when we're satiated or when we're hungry can be not properly balanced and aligned. And so we can crave some of the sugary foods.
Mm.
We can make poor choices in the evening times for the snacks that we want when we're sleep deprived. We cannot be, we often also may not be able to make the weight goals that we're targeting when we're not sleeping well. So, yeah, our physiology also includes things like you can have higher inflammatory levels, your emotional regulation is going to be impacted, your cognitive performance. So, yes, goes beyond the physical performance. We know that for each and every one of us, sleep is so critical for our bodies to be able to function properly.
Wow, it is incredible, isn't it? And we talked at the start there about your work with athletes and business leaders. I mean, is there some interesting data you can share with us around just how impactful getting that extra sleep can be for performance? I know you mentioned a couple of stats in there earlier. What have you seen?
Yes. So my research has largely focused on elite athletes at the college
Mm.
level to quantify the difference it can make when you actually pay back that sleep debt and what it could mean in terms of reaction time or on-court performance. So one of my earlier studies looked at the Stanford men's basketball team and showed that as you paid back sleep debt, so they extended their sleep for 5 to 7 weeks. So it wasn't just one weekend or
Hmm.
2 weekends of sleep, but they went for 5 to 7 weeks, aiming for 10 hours of sleep a night to try and pay back that sleep debt over multiple weeks. And we demonstrated that their shooting accuracy improved, their free throw shots increased by 9%, they sprinted faster by 4%, and they reacted faster by 12%. And so this was the quantification that was, to me, incredibly fascinating because at this level, these athletes are looking for a 1% gain in everything
Yes.
they do. But this was 9% or double digits, depending on what outcome we were looking at. And so you may not be an elite athlete. You may not even feel like you're an athlete day by day, but hopefully it's just an example of the power of sleep and how much that can impact and improve performance measures in a sport where obviously the difference between gains can be incredibly impactful on outcomes.
I mean, how do some of the coaches and athletes that you've shared this data with, you've been able to show these increases, how do they react? It must take them by surprise. I mean, some coaches might have spent years training athletes and never seen any gains like this.
Yes, no, I mean, I think everyone is pretty astounded when they see the numbers, and but if anything, they, I think, have started to embrace and recognize that, this has to be an area that they encourage and support and build into how they factor their training schedules or when they travel, because the science has evolved and there's been more studies to demonstrate that, this is non-negotiable. If you really want your athletes to perform their best, the rest, the recovery has to be a critical piece of that puzzle. Of course, easier said than done. There's only 24 hours in our day, and so it does take some creative strategizing with
Mm.
coaches to try and make sure there are those windows of opportunity that their athletes can get the rest required. And I will still say, coaches are still evolving in their understanding of sleep. It's still relatively new, and so there's a fair amount of education still that I do frequently to show how much of an impact this can have.
Similarly, when we think of businesses and wanting to get the competitive edge by getting people in earlier, having those breakfast meetings, let's meet at 6 a.m., 7 a.m. for that breakfast meeting. Um, what do you think needs to change around that business culture? And are you seeing it changing? Should we be having breakfast meetings at that time?
I think it needs to evolve so it factors in when people really are at their best. And
Mm.
that is different from you to me to, a whole team of employees. And the reality is that each of us has what is called a chronotype, where we have our preferred bedtime and a preferred wake up time. You've heard
Yeah.
morning larks and you've heard evening owls. Now, the vast majority of us are somewhere in the middle. Now, that means that that earlier morning lark will perform better in the first couple of hours of their day. So for them, that 6 o'clock meeting maybe is a great time to have that high stakes decision making conversation. That's a great time for them to exercise, to be able to do some of these high cognitive load tasks. They will do less well, say, in that later afternoon or
Mm.
evening time,
Mm.
where on contrary, those evening owls will. That's when they thrive. Those evening owls will not do well at that 6 a.m. breakfast. So they should not be the ones to come in and schedule those high stakes decisions at that point. Obviously, understanding this takes some time to identify what your chronotypes are in, say, a team environment. But I really think customizing that schedule so that you're getting the best out of your employees and the best sessions possible is going to be the future, ideally. And
Yeah.
I think it's a creative way that has not been exploited well and leveraged in society and in industry to today. I will say there are certain leaders that have figured this out, at least for themselves.
Mm.
So I believe Jeff Bezos says, he doesn't schedule any high stakes meeting until 10 a.m. because before that, he isn't his best. And
Yeah.
he really also doesn't want to have late afternoon meetings that he will say, I'll save for another day.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, and it will be sort of fascinating to see how this pans out because I'm sure you're right that this is going to just filter down and become the norm. But you think even of situations like conferences where the scheduling of a conference will be that there's a late dinner and then, people are standing at the bar afterwards, networking, talking up all hours, some of them drinking. And then you're expected to be on the floor first thing the next morning, and you might be giving a presentation. And people, I've been there
It's
myself, and you
exhausting.
arrive home like, and when you are giving the presentation the next day, usually adrenaline gets you through, but you would have that much better edge if you just had a night's sleep.
Yeah, and hopefully with more flexibility in, say, work
Mm.
schedules, I hope that there'll be more receptivity to, different work schedules that align with your chronotype so that you get the best work out of your team. And then, consequently, you're going to get a better product and hopefully a better line at the end.
And I mean, just wrapping it up in a nutshell, really, for people, I'm gonna try this myself. I think what I'm hearing the best strategy is to maybe uh, optimize our sleep, but also test what are our sleep boundaries. I mean, for me, I'm thinking I thought it was 8 hours, but now I'm thinking, well, what if it's longer? How do I know? I go to bed at 10:30. Why don't I try 10 lights out at 10:15 tonight? Would that be the idea? Just taking it back 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so, and then actually look at whether your boundaries for sleep expand slightly based on changing those times.
Definitely. I'd encourage you to try that starting tonight, 10:15, and do that for the whole week. Keep that
Hmm.
wake up time the same, but
Hmm.
if you wake up after this week and you're saying, "Hey, I do actually feel a little bit more refreshed. My day is a little bit peppier. I don't need the caffeine as I did previously," then you're headed in the right direction. Some people will have a way that they can quantify that for themselves, whether it's an activity that they do regularly, and they can keep that as a gauge of how their sleep is influencing that productivity or that output. And that's okay if you don't have a measure, but I think you will start to see trends over time as you experiment with your duration specifically.
Okay, I'm going to try that. And one that just cropped up in my mind that I meant to ask earlier around aging, because I mean, when I think of my own parents, they are really actually being aware now of sleep and longevity and so on. They are trying to optimize their sleep. I know my dad in particular, my mum says the same thing. She says, you just wake earlier, it's just harder to sleep for longer. Is that quite a common thing in older people? They're in their 80s now. And is that okay? Do we need less sleep as we age, or what should they be doing?
We do think that your duration that you require stays consistent through the lifespan.
Okay.
So even though they're having awakenings that are earlier and they may not feel like they're getting the same duration, their stages of sleep are shifting, as I mentioned, a little bit into the lighter stages. They particularly men lose that deep sleep, and so they will feel like their sleep is changing, which is true,
Mm.
but the duration still likely needs to be about the same. What's more important as you age is thinking about how are the quality factors that I can improve and be mindful of so that the quality of my sleep is as optimal as possible. So, again, thinking about some of those daytime habits that support good sleep. Are they getting sunlight when they wake up and keeping that same wake up time? Are they keeping caffeine to the morning time? Do they get regular exercise, which we know is so helpful for quality sleep? If they're napping, are they short naps or not having naps so that their drive to sleep is as high as possible when it gets to the evening time? When you get to the evening time now, do you have a good wind down routine to transition from your busy day? Are you trying to minimize, say, fluids at hour or two before bed so you're not waking up for the night? Are you stopping those big meals at least 2 to 3 hours before bedtime so that won't be a disrupting factor? Is your environment dark and quiet, cool, comfortable, consistent so that you get the most conducive environment for a quality sleep as possible? Now, I will also add, as you get older, people can be at higher risk for sleep disorders. Sleep apnea is one of the most common sleep disorders that we often see, and so being mindful if you snore or if you're having these awakenings during the early morning hours, those could be symptoms of suggesting that you should talk to your primary care doctor or schedule an appointment with a sleep specialist because sleep apnea is estimated to be around 26%. At least here in the US population, which is huge. That's 1 in almost 4 individuals. And so, and it doesn't have to mean waiting till you're in your 80s. I will say, even as, when you're in perimenopause and menopause, women are 3 times more likely to be at risk for apnea as you go through the specific life stage, because you're losing the protection of that estrogen. And so even for women, and you don't have to be overweight or a male to be at risk for apnea, but that could be also a time point if you're struggling with sleep to be able to reach out to a provider and address not just perimenopause and menopause symptoms that can influence sleep, but specifically, do you have symptoms suggestive of apnea that need to be evaluated and addressed?
Dr. Mah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And I will be tucking myself into bed 15 minutes earlier tonight based on this conversation.
Wonderful. I hope that you get to experiment with yourself of how sleep can really benefit your day-to-day functioning, and I hope you sleep just a little bit better tonight.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Mah. I'll include her details in the description below so you can follow her for more expert insights. And for me, one of the biggest takeaways is that sleep isn't some passive state where the body simply switches off. It's a vital process of repair and recovery, and far more important to our long-term health, resilience and performance than many of us ever realize. So if you know someone who's constantly running on empty, or is just worried that poor sleep is something they have to accept as they get older, please do share this episode with them. I'd love for you to hit subscribe or follow if you haven't already to catch future episodes from us. And if you'd like to support the channel further and access extra content and perks from us in return, you'll find information about becoming a member in the description below. Also there, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter where I round up the latest conversations, research and healthy aging inspiration from the Honest channel and my website honest.scot, so you don't miss a thing. But until next time, take care of your sleep, and thank you so much for joining us today.